Good morning, girls. This is our last Java session, right? In today's session, we are going to cover our unit number 5, that is Spring and Struts. Here, a very basic concept of Spring and Struts is covered, but the weightage is same, 20 marks. So all the topics of this unit is important. Let us begin with this meaning of Spring framework. Here, Spring is a lightweight framework. We have already studied one framework in J2Ee subject, that is Hibernate. Similarly, here Spring is also a framework. It can be thought of as framework because it provides support to various frameworks such as Struts, Hibernate, Tapestry, EJB, JSF, etc. The framework, in broader sense, can be defined as a structure where we find a solution of the various technical problems. It was developed by Rod Johnson in 2003. Spring framework make the easy development of J2Ee application. It is very helpful for beginners as well as for experienced person. This framework comprises of several modules such as IOC, AOP, DAO, Context, ORM, WebMVC, etc. Let us learn the architecture of Spring Framework. As you can see the diagram of Spring Framework, it comprises of 7 different modules, right? Let us consider all the modules one by one. Begin with core container. The core container is the heart of Spring Framework and all other modules are built on top of it. It provides the dependency injection feature. It is also known as inversion of control, DI and IOC. These are the short form of dependency injection and inversion of control respectively. This module contains the bean factory. Bean factory means it is an implementation of factory pattern which creates and manages the life cycle of your application object, right, which is defined in the Spring Bean configuration file. Second module is application context. This module provides a various enterprise level service, internationalization, scheduling, JNDI access, email, etc. The third block is AOP. AOP, this module helps in implementing the various cross-cutting concern. Okay, aspect oriented programming. This module helps in implementing the various cross-cutting concern in the application like logging, transaction management, transaction management, etc. These concerns are decoupled from the application code and are injected into the various point cuts through the configuration file. Aspect oriented programming entails the breaking down program logic into distinct parts called so-called concern. So here you can take the concept of subprogramming, right? The function that span multiple points of an application are called cross-cutting concerns. And the cross-cutting concerns are conceptually separate from the application business logic. Here you can separate the logic which is common for some other applications, right, that we can cover in our aspect oriented programming topic. There are various common good example of aspect like logging, auditing, declarative transaction, security, then catching, etc. The key unit of modularity in OOP is the class, whereas in AOP the unit of modularity is the aspect. Here, dependency injection, this term helps us to decouple our application object from each other, and AOP help us decouple cross-cutting concern from the object that they affect. AOP is like triggers in programming language such as Perl, .NET, Java and others, which we have already learned somewhere in our previous semesters. Spring AOP module provides interceptors to intercept an application. For example, when a method is executed, you can add extra functionality before or after the method execution. Here you assume that you have one method created in your application. So before your method and after that method, you can add some extra functionality with the help of AOP module. Next is Spring Web. Spring Framework helps in developing web-based application by providing the Spring Web module. This module is built on top of application context module and provides web-oriented features. Spring MVC. This module is built on the top of Spring Web and help in developing web application based on MVC design pattern. We have already studied how to define our application based on MVC, right? Spring DAO. Almost every enterprise application needs to interact with a database. If you want to do the programming which is related with the database, then you have to include a Spring DOA module in your application. Spring DAO module makes it easy to interact with database by providing an abstraction over low-level JDBC tasks like creating a database connection or release it. Next module is Spring ORM. There exist a number of popular object relational mapping tools like Hibernate, IBetis, JPA, etc. Spring ORM module helps in integrating with these tools. If you want to integrate Hibernate in your application, here you can take the help of Spring ORM, right? Now, what is the reason why we have to use Spring framework in our application? Here you can see the advantages of Spring framework. Number one, predefined templates. Spring framework provides us a template for JDBC, Hibernate, JPA, etc. Right? In this technology, you can use predefined templates, so there is no need to write too much code. It hides the basic steps of these technologies. Let us take the example of JDBC template. You don't need to write the code for exception handling, like creating connections, creating statements, committing transaction or closing your connection, right? You need to write the code of executing query only. Thus it save a lot of JDBC code. You can reduce your code. Second is loose coupling. The Spring application are loosely coupled because of the term dependency injection. I will show you or explain you this term later. Number 3, easy to test. The dependency injection make easier to test the application. The EJB or strut application require server to run the application, but Spring framework doesn't require any server, so it become easier for testing your application. Fourth advantage is lightweight. This framework is lightweight because of its POJO implementation. The Spring framework does not force the programmer to inherit any class or implement any interface. That's why it is said that it is non-invasive or lightweight. Then fast development. The dependency injection feature of Spring framework make it faster, right? And its support to various framework makes the easy development of J2EE application. Number 6 is powerful abstraction. It provides powerful abstraction to Java EE specification such as JMS, JDBC, JPA and JTA. Number 7 is declarative support. It provides a declarative support for caching, validation, transactions and formatting of your applications. Now let us cover the Spring MVC. Spring MVC provides an elegant solution to use MVC in Spring framework by the help of dispatcher servlet. As you know the full form of MVC, model view and controller, we can divide our application in this structure, right, with Spring framework. In Spring Web MVC, dispatcher servlet class works as the front controller. It is responsible to manage the flow of application. The controller annotation we can use for that purpose, and it is used to mark the class as the controller in Spring 3. The request mapping annotation is used to map the request URL. It is applied on the method. Here you can see the structure or flow of Spring Web MVC. Request is sent by a client, which we will accept in dispatcher servlet. Later it will be sent to the handler mapping and controller. Controller will control the flow of application and send it back to the dispatcher servlet via model and view. Then view resolver will come in picture. It will resolve the application purpose, and then whatever the result generate this application will be shown by the viewer part. As displayed in the figure, all the incoming request is intercepted by the dispatcher servlet that works as the front controller. The dispatcher servlet gets entry of handler mapping from the XML file and forward the request to the controller. The controller returns an object of model and view. The dispatcher servlet check the entry of view resolver in the XML file and invoke the specified view component. Next is Spring Context. Spring contexts are also called Spring IOC containers, which are responsible for instantiating, configuring and assembling beans by reading configuration metadata from XML. Java annotation and or Java code in the configuration files. Let us see what is inversion of control. This question is most important, we can say. Definitely they will ask inversion of control, the concept of inversion of control in final exams, right? So do it by heart. Spring framework is built on the inversion of control principle. Inversion of control is a principle in software engineering by which the control of object or portions of a program is transferred to a container or a framework. It's most often used in the context of object-oriented programming. By contrast with traditional programming, in which our custom code make calls to a library, IOC enables a framework instead of that library to take control of flow of a program and make calls to our custom code. આપણે જે ટ્રેડિશનલ પ્રોગ્રામિંગ અપ્રોચ ફોલો કરીએ છીએ એની અંદર જનરલી જે કસ્ટમ કોડ છે એ લાઇબ્રેરીને કોલ કરે છે, જ્યારે કે અહીંયા સ્પ્રિંગ સ્ટ્રક્ચરની અંદર આઈઓસી જે છે એ ફ્રેમવર્કને એક્ટિવ કરે છે. To enable this, frameworks use abstraction with additional behavior built in. If we want to add our own behavior, we need to extend the classes of the framework or plug in our own classes. Let us see the advantage of this architecture. It decouples the execution of a task from its implementation, make it easier to switch between different implementation. It has a greater modularity of a program, and greater is in testing a program by isolating a component or mocking its dependencies and allow component to communicate through contracts. Inversion of control can be achieved through the technique dependency injection. Dependency injection is a pattern through which to implement IOC where the control being inverted is the setting of an object dependency. The act of connecting object with other objects or injecting object into other object is done by an assembler rather than by the object themselves. Here how you would create an object dependency in traditional programming. See the snippet of code, it is shown here. Okay, public class store. Here one class is declared, public class store, which has one private member of type item. Item is an another class. Okay, and here what we have done, created one constructor. Inside the constructor we have instantiated an object of item class, right? So in the example above, we need to instantiate an implementation of the item interface. Here you can see. Okay, by using DI means implementing dependency injection, we can rewrite the above code as shown here, in the way as shown here. See, public class store, private item of type item, right? Public store, it has one parameter, whereas here you can see this no parameters defined, and this dot item equals to item, so no need to instantiate an object, right? So above code make program loosely coupled. In such a case, there is no need to modify the code if our logic is changed. In Spring Framework, IOC container is responsible to insert this type of dependency. So we provide a metadata to the IOC container either by XML file or by annotation, right? So this is all about Spring in unit 5. And next is struts. Strut is a framework based on MVC architecture, that stands for model view and controller architecture, same as Spring. It is an open source platform and is used to develop enterprise edition web application. It has a request handler and response handler because it is based on request based framework, which handles the request from the user. Ajax, REST and SOAP are supported by the struts. Apache Struts is an open source framework for developing Java Enterprise web application. It uses Java Servlet API to implement the web application based on MVC design pattern. Let us see how strut works. Strut to MVC is realized by 3 core framework component. Number 1 is action, second is result, and the third one is servlet filter. The diagram below shows how these 3 components interact with each other, right? Here you can see web browser client is placed, second is controller, which invoke the action, then pass on the action and select the appropriate result and show on your browser in the form of result. Okay, let us try to understand each block one by one. Number 1 is servlet filter. The servlet filter acts as a controller in strut 2. It inspects each incoming request to determine which strut action should be handled the request. The framework handles all of the controller work for the application. All request URL needs to be mapped to the action with XML based configuration files or Java annotation. Second is interceptor. Interceptors execute before and after the requesting process. They provide cross-cutting tasks so that they can be easily reused as well as separated from other architectural concerns. For example, validation of parameters before invoking login action, right? You can keep that code common for all applications. Okay, so this is called cross-cutting task. Number 3 is action. Action handles the client request in 2 different ways. First, The action plays an important role in the transfer of data from the request through to the view, whether it is a JSP or any other type of result. Second, the action must assess the framework in determining which result should render the view that will be returned in the response to the request. Next is result. Result is a JSP or HTML page to create a view for client response. Struts to provide their own text that we can use in JSP pages to create response. Strut tags are a great example of JSP custom tags. Now architecture and the flow of strut. Architecture and flow of strut to application is combined with many components such as controller, action proxy, action mapper, configuration manager, action invoke, interceptor and action results, etc. Let us try to understand the basic flow of struts. Here you can see the simple figure. Okay, here user sends a request for the action, then in the second stage controller invokes the action invocation, which is a normal class. Action invocation invoke each interceptor and action. In the fourth step a result is generated. The result is sent back to the action invocation in step number 5. HTTP servlet response is generated and response is sent back to the user. Now processing request with action object. In strut 2, action class is a POJO. POJO means plain old Java object. POJO means you are not forced to implement any interface or extend any class. Generally, execute method should be specified that represent the business logic. The simple action class may look like this. As you can see the example, welcome.java is the name of this file. Name of class is welcome and it has only one method with name execute, which will return a string. Action interface. A convenient approach is to implement the com.OpenSymfony.xwork2.action interface that define 5 constants and 1 execute method. You can override this methods, right? Action interface provide 5 constant and that can be returned from the action class. They are success, error, login, input and none. Success indicates that action execution is successful and a success result should be shown to the user. Error indicates that action execution is failed and an error result should be shown to the user. Your login indicates that user is not logged in and login result should be shown to the user. Input indicates that validation is failed and input result should be shown to the user again. And the fifth constant is none, which indicates that action execution is successful but no result should be shown to the user. The flow control is shown on the screen. Let us try to understand this flow. Here the user requests a form, as you can see, from his or her computer, right? The form is submitted to the URL of the form. Here it is. That address is mapped by the strut config.xml file to an action class. The execute method of the action object is invoked. One of the argument to the execute is a form bin that is automatically created and whose properties are automatically populated. See here, automation concept is bind with the strut framework, so it become very easy for to us to create an application through strut framework. So it automatically populate based on the incoming request parameters of the same name, incoming request parameters of the same type. The action object then invoke a business logic and data access logic, placing the result in normal bean stored in request, session or application scope. The action uses mapping define forward to return a condition, and the condition are mapped by the strut config.xml file through the various JSP page. Strut forwards request to the appropriate JSP page, right? The page can use bean write or the JSP2EL to output bean properties. The page can also use bean message to output fixed strings. Here it has a new capabilities, defining a form bean. Struts lets you define a bean that represent the incoming request data. Struts will create and populate the bean for you and pass it to the action as the second argument to the execute method. Okay, bean must extend action form, and it must be declared in strut config.xml with the help of form beans. Outputting bean properties, you can use the strut bean write tag to output a bean properties in JSP page property. In JSP page, as we have already learned how to use a bean tag in our JSP page during our JSP sessions, right? And the basic 6 steps you have to follow if you want to use a strut in your application. Modify strut config.xml, use web inf struts strut config.xml file to map incoming addresses to action classes, to map return condition to JSP pages, to declare any form beans that are being used, and to restart the server after modifying your strut XML file, right? Configuration XML file. Then in the second step, to define a form bean. This bean extends action form and represents the data submitted by the user. It is automatically populated when the input form is submitted. More precisely, the reset method is called by the session scope beans. It is useful for session scope beans. For each incoming request parameter, the corresponding setter method is called, and the validate method is also called. In the third step, to create a result beans. These are normal beans of the sort used in MVC when implemented directly with request dispatcher. That is, they represent the result of the business logic and data access code. These beans are stored in request session or application scope with the set attribute method of HTTP servlet request, HTTP session, or servlet context, just in normal non-strut application, as we do in our normal applications, right? Define an action class to handle a request. Rather than calling request get parameter explicitly, as in rather than calling this parameter explicitly, in the previous example, the execute method cast the action form argument to the specific form bean class, then uses a getter method to access that property of the object. Next step is to create a form that invoke messages to output fixed string from a property file, and the last step is to display result in JSP form. The JSP page uses a bean write tag to display this output, right? Whatever property they want to display on the page, they use bean write tag for that. It may also use the bean message tag to output a standard message and text labels that are defined in a property file. So this is all about struts, right? This much content we have to cover in Spring and struts, and the practical portion we are not covering here as it is not mentioned in our syllabus, right? But still it is shown in the book, but no need to prepare it, because whenever the examiner comes for practical exam, they never ask for Spring and strut examples, as it is as here you can see the basic concept is the part of our curriculum. That's it. Here our J2Ee sessions are over, right? So keep on reading all the content of J2Ee and prepare all the practicals as I told you in the previous session. I am repeating it. for practical exams you have to prepare JDBC connection. Second is one RMI application. Number 3 is JDBC connection with the help of servlets, okay, to deal with any database with the help of servlet. 3 and number 4 is you have to prepare one Hibernate application. So all the best for your current semester and for your practical exams. Thank you.